Have you ever noticed that the calmest people in the room are often the most haunted? You're not calm. You're just frozen. You smile. You nod. You tell yourself you're above it all. But deep down, your body's still bracing for impact. That insult. You replayed it for hours. That dismissal. It stung longer than you care to admit. This isn't calm. It's suppression. And suppression isn't peace. It's a slow betrayal of your soul. Carl Jung didn't teach us to become statues. He taught us how to face what moves beneath the surface, so we can finally stop being owned by what others do. You were in that meeting last week. Someone spoke over you again. You didn't argue. You didn't flinch. You told yourself, let it go. But all night, your chest felt tight. Your mind kept looping. Or maybe it was your partner. They forgot something important to you. You smiled and said, it's fine. But inside, it wasn't fine. You weren't fine. You were invisible. These are the moments that unravel us slowly. Not because they're huge, but because they're familiar. Because every time you stay silent for the sake of peace, you feel a little more erased. And no one sees it. Because on the outside, you're composed, spiritual even. But inside, there's a scream that never gets heard. Take a breath with me here. What I'm about to share might feel uncomfortable, but it's necessary. You know that feeling when someone treats you poorly, and instead of responding, you just absorb it. You tell yourself you're being the bigger person, though, but your nervous system tells a different story. It's stuck in a loop, replaying the moment, searching for what you should have said. This is where most of us live, in the gap between who we pretend to be and who we actually are. Carl Jung called it the war between the persona and the shadow, the you that the world sees and the you that you've disowned. The calm version of you is polite, spiritual, rational. She meditates, he journals. They choose their words carefully and don't take things personally. But what about the version of you that's angry? The one that wants to scream when disrespected? The part that remembers being dismissed as a child and still hasn't been allowed to speak? You thought you'd healed, but really, you just learned how to perform calm. This is the trap of the good one, the kind one, the healer, the empath. You've built your peace by abandoning your rage, but rage is not the enemy. Let me tell you about Emma. She was 32, a therapist, someone everyone came to for advice. She prided herself on never losing her temper. I'm not like my mother, she'd say. I don't yell. But Emma had migraines, chronic fatigue. Her body was screaming what her voice refused to say. During one session with her own therapist, she was asked, "When was the last time you felt genuinely angry?" Emma couldn't remember. Not because she didn't feel anger, but because she'd taught herself to translate it immediately into something more palatable. Disappointment, sadness, spiritual bypassing. I just rise above it, she explained. But her therapist asked something that changed everything. Who in you is doing the rising, and who gets left behind? This might be hitting close to home. That's okay. Stay with me. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It sinks, and from there it controls you, quietly. Every time you choose peace over truth, you split yourself a little more. The part of you that feels becomes the enemy. The part that stays quiet becomes the hero. But Jung knew better. He understood that wholeness doesn't come from choosing light over dark. It comes from integrating both. Your calmness isn't peace. It's a performance designed to avoid being hurt again. The person who triggered you today, they're not your real problem. Your real problem is the part of you that learned it wasn't safe to have a reaction in the first place. You learned to smile through the sting. to be the safe one, the smart one, the undemanding one, because being expressive, that got you punished or ignored. So you became the statue, the one who absorbs everyone else's emotional chaos without adding to it, the shock absorber in every relationship. But statues don't feel safe. They just look unbreakable. This is the question most never ask, because to ask it is to admit that your calmness might not be real. It might be protection. It might be an old role, one you learned as a child to avoid rejection, shame, punishment. But here's the truth Jung left for us. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Every time someone makes you feel small, and you don't understand why it cuts so deep, it's because you're not reacting to just them. You're reacting to the entire archetype they awaken inside you. The excluded child, the silenced feminine, the disrespected father, the self that was never allowed to exist fully. Pause here and ask yourself, what part of me learned that being calm meant being lovable? Let me share another story. David was 41, a manager at a tech company. He was known for his even temper, his ability to handle difficult clients without losing his cool. David never gets rattled, his colleagues would say. But David's marriage was falling apart. His wife kept saying she felt like she was living with a ghost. "You never react to anything," she'd tell him. "It's like you're not even here." David couldn't understand it. He thought his calmness was his strength. He thought he was being mature, evolved. Until one Thursday evening when everything changed. Their 16-year-old son Jake got suspended from school for getting into a fight. When the principal called, David responded with his usual measured tone. "We'll handle it. Thank you for letting us know." He drove to pick up Jake in silence, walked him to the car in silence, drove home in silence. But Jake, raw with the kind of emotion that only teenagers can access, looked at his father and said something that cracked David's carefully constructed calm like an egg hitting concrete. "Don't you even care? Why don't you ever get mad about anything? Sometimes I wonder if you even love me, because you never react, like nothing I do matters enough to make you feel something." That night, David sat in his car in the garage for 3 hours, engine off, trying to remember the last time he'd felt anything fully. Not the edited version, not the appropriate response, not the calm, rational, measured reaction that everyone expected from him, but the raw, unfiltered truth of his inner world. He couldn't. This is what happens when you become addicted to emotional flatness. You don't just suppress the difficult emotions, you suppress all of them. Joy becomes contentment, excitement becomes satisfaction, love becomes care, passion becomes preference. You become a functional ghost, walking through your own life in emotional autopilot, wondering why everything feels muted, distant, like you're watching someone else's movie. The part of David that felt deeply, that got excited about things, frustrated by injustice, passionate about ideas, heartbroken by beauty, had been locked away so long he'd forgotten it existed. He'd become so good at being calm that he'd forgotten how to be alive. If this is resonating, you're not broken. You're just remembering. Jung called this shadow work, the process of reclaiming the parts of yourself you've disowned. But he also spoke of something even more profound, the transcendent function, the ability to hold both the light and Carl Jung shadow aspects of yourself without choosing sides, without making one right and the other wrong. But most of us were never taught this. Instead, we learned that emotions are problems to be solved, storms to be weathered, inconveniences to be managed. We learned that calm people are good people, that reactive people are broken people, that healing means never getting upset about anything. But your anger isn't your enemy. It's your boundary detector. Your internal GPS system that tells you when something important is being violated. Your sadness isn't weakness. It's your heart grieving what was lost, honoring what mattered. Your fear isn't failure. It's your nervous system trying to keep you safe in a world that often isn't. When you were young, maybe these feelings weren't welcomed. Maybe they were met with punishment, withdrawal of love, or chaos that felt bigger than you could handle. Maybe showing your full emotional range. Made the adults around you uncomfortable, so you learned to edit yourself in real time. The trauma isn't just what happened to you, it's what you had to give up about yourself to survive it. You learned that love was conditional on your behavior, that acceptance required conformity, that being wanted meant being easy, uncomplicated, low maintenance. So you became low maintenance. You became the one who never needed anything, never asked for much, never caused problems. You became so good at managing your own emotions that everyone else started depending on you to manage theirs too. Your calmness became your cage, a beautiful, socially acceptable cage that everyone admires and no one questions, but a cage nonetheless. Because here's what nobody tells you about emotional suppression. It's not selective. You can't numb fear without numbing joy. You can't shut down anger without shutting down passion. You can't close your heart to pain without closing it to love. Emma's migraines weren't random. They were her body's way of expressing the pressure of all that unfelt anger. David's emotional numbness wasn't spiritual advancement. It was dissociation with good PR. And your calm, the one you've worked so hard to cultivate, that everyone praises you for, that you've built your identity around, it might be the very thing standing between you and the life you actually want to live. So, what do you do now? How do you find your way back to yourself after years of emotional exile? You stop trying to control your reaction, and you start getting curious about it. Next time your body tenses when someone dismisses you, don't rush to breathe it out or let it go. Ask it, what are you trying to protect me from? What do you know that I'm not acknowledging? When you feel heat rise in your chest during a conversation, don't shame it for not being spiritual enough. Let it speak. Let it tell you what boundary is being crossed, what value is being threatened, what part of you needs defending. Because that part of you that reacts, the one you've labeled overreactive, sensitive, unhealed, isn't weak at all. It's ancient, it's alert, and it holds every moment you were taught to shrink to survive, every time you made yourself smaller to make others comfortable. Here's what nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't feel calm at first. It feels alive. Emma started doing something radical after that session with her therapist. When someone interrupted her in meetings, instead of immediately going to her let it go place, she'd pause and ask herself, what does the interrupted part of me want to say? Not to the person who interrupted her, to herself. What was the feeling before she edited it? What was the truth before she made it palatable? The first time she tried this, she was shocked by what came up. Rage. Pure, clean rage that felt like lightning in her chest. And underneath that grief, ocean-deep grief, for all the times her voice hadn't mattered. All the times she'd made herself invisible to avoid conflict. All the times she'd chosen peace over truth. She didn't act on the rage. She didn't storm out of the meeting or tell her colleague exactly what she thought of his chronic interruptions. She just felt it, let it move through her body instead of pushing it down into the basement of her psyche. And something miraculous happened. The migraine she'd been carrying for 3 days disappeared. Just like that. Like her body had been waiting her entire life for her to finally listen. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not getting rid of the parts of yourself you don't like, not transcending your humanity, but bringing all of it into conscious relationship, the light, and the Carl Jung Shadow, the calm and the storm, the healer and the one who needs healing. Over the next few months, Emma learned to distinguish between reacting and responding. Reacting was unconscious old patterns playing out automatically. But responding, that required feeling first, then choosing. She started setting boundaries that would have terrified her old self, saying no to extra work when she was already overwhelmed, telling her sister that last-minute cancellations weren't okay, choosing restaurants she actually wanted to go to instead of defaulting to whatever everyone else preferred. To her surprise, the world didn't end. People didn't abandon her. Some were confused, sure, a few were even upset. But the ones who mattered, they respected her more, not less. Try this. Next time you feel triggered, instead of asking, "How do I stay calm?" ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" David started his own experiment after that conversation with his son. Every evening before walking into his house, he'd sit in his car for 10 minutes, not to clear his mind or find his center, but to check in with his actual experience. What did I feel today that I didn't let myself feel? The first week was overwhelming. He realized he'd been angry about 17 different things that day, small things that his rational mind had dismissed as unimportant. His coffee being wrong at the morning meeting, a colleague taking credit for his idea, his wife's tone when she asked about dinner plans, the way his boss had looked at him during the presentation. But instead of judging himself for these feelings, labeling them as petty or immature, he started getting curious. What was the anger really about? What boundary had been crossed? What need wasn't being met? What value was being violated? Slowly, David started to come back to life. Not the explosive, chaotic life he'd been afraid of, the kind he'd witnessed in his own father's rage-filled household, but a real life, one where his feelings were information, not problems, where his emotions were messengers, not mistakes. He started speaking up in meetings when he disagreed, instead of nodding along to keep the peace. He told Claire when her comments hurt his feelings, instead of withdrawing into stony silence. He showed excitement about things that mattered to him, even if others didn't understand. His wife noticed the change immediately. "You're actually here," she said one evening, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time in years. "I can feel you again. It's like you came back from somewhere far away." This is the paradox of authentic calm. To find it, you have to be willing to lose the fake version first. You have to be willing to feel uncool, unspiritual, unhealed. For a while, as you remember what it's like to be fully human. Real calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of choice. It's feeling everything and responding from consciousness instead of reacting from unconsciousness. To stay truly calm, you have to stop punishing the part of you that feels too much. You have to bring your Carl Jung shadow into the light. You have to listen to the pain instead of silencing it. Honor the anger instead of suppressing it. Welcome the sadness instead of medicating it away. That's the only way it will stop screaming in the dark. That's the only way you'll stop being haunted by the ghost of who you used to be before you learned that feelings were dangerous. You don't heal by becoming invulnerable. You heal by becoming real. It doesn't feel like silence. It feels like presence. The kind of presence that can hold whatever arises without needing to fix it, change it, or make it go away. It doesn't feel like tolerance. It feels like discernment, the ability to see clearly what's yours to carry and what belongs to someone else. You speak softly, not because you're afraid to raise your voice, but because you don't need to. Your power comes from knowing who you are, not from proving it to others. You let someone's insult pass, not because you're numb to pain, but because you can see it for what it is, their unhealed wound trying to find a home in your psyche. You feel anger rise when someone crosses a boundary, and you sit with it, not to shut it down or transcend it, but to let it show you what needs protection, what deserves defending, what boundary needs to be rebuilt or reinforced. This is self-trust, and trust is what creates true calm. Not control, not suppression, not spiritual bypassing, but the deep knowing that you can handle whatever life brings without losing yourself in the process. When you stop abandoning yourself every time life gets uncomfortable, something fundamental shifts. You realize you don't have to choose between feeling and functioning, between being sensitive and being strong, between having emotions and having wisdom. You can be all of it. Real calm isn't the absence of feeling, it's the presence of choice. Emma learned to say, "That doesn't work for me," without apologizing or explaining herself to death. She learned to feel frustrated without making it mean she was unhealed. She learned to set boundaries without making them mean she was selfish. When her landlord raised her rent again with 2 weeks' notice, she didn't just absorb it with spiritual resignation. She felt the anger, let it inform her, and then took action from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. She found a new apartment and moved out with dignity intact. When her sister canceled plans at the last minute again, she didn't just smile and say, "No worries." She had a conversation. A real conversation where she explained how the pattern affected her and what needed to change. Her sister was defensive at first, but eventually they found their way to a deeper understanding of each other. David learned to show excitement about things that mattered to him, even if others didn't share his enthusiasm. He started a woodworking project in his garage, something he'd been thinking about for years but never pursued because it seemed impractical. When friends made jokes about his midlife crisis, he just smiled and kept carving. He learned to feel disappointed when Claire forgot something important and to express that disappointment without making it an attack on her character. Their fights became real conversations. Their conversations became genuine connection. Most importantly, he learned to be present with his son's big emotions instead of trying to fix them or calm them down. When Jake came home upset about something at school, David didn't rush to solve the problem or offer wisdom. He just sat there and felt it with him. "That sounds really hard," he'd say, and somehow that was enough. They both learned that authentic calm isn't about being undisturbed. It's about being able to weather your own emotional storms without losing yourself in them, without needing the world to be different than it is for you to be okay. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you can't become who you truly are while you're still performing who you think you should be. You can't find your authentic self while you're still trying to be the perfect version of yourself that never gets upset, never needs anything, never inconveniences anyone. The calm that can't be taken from you doesn't come from controlling your environment, managing other people's behavior, or creating a life so perfect that nothing ever goes wrong. It comes from trusting your ability to navigate whatever arises, the beautiful and the brutal, the expected and the shocking, the gentle and the devastating. When someone treats you poorly now, you feel it fully, the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, and then you choose your response from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. When disappointment hits, you let it teach you something about what you value, instead of pretending it doesn't matter. When fear arises, you listen to what it's trying to protect, instead of pushing it away as weakness. This is the difference between suppression and integration. Suppression says, "This feeling is wrong and needs to go away." Integration says, "This feeling is information and deserves to be heard." You don't have to harden to stay calm. You have to open. You have to allow your inner world to exist without judgment, to feel without fixing, to be human without apologizing for it. And in doing so, you become unshakable. Not because you don't feel, but because you know what to do with what you feel. Not because you're above human emotion, but because you're finally at home in your full humanity. So here's the truth. You can't control what people say. You can't predict who will disappoint you, and you won't always be understood. But you can reclaim the part of you that stopped feeling safe. You can learn to sit with your inner storm instead of begging the world to be quieter. As Jung wrote, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. You are not the waves. You are the ocean beneath them. So when the world gets loud, when people try to pull you back into chaos, pause. Not to suppress, but to listen. Ask, who in me is rising? What truth have I not yet spoken to myself? Because staying calm isn't about ignoring the pain. It's about walking with it with awareness. That's what Jung meant by individuation. That's the calmness no one can steal from you. The next time someone triggers you, remember they're not your enemy. They're your teacher. And the lesson isn't how to stay unaffected. It's how to stay awake. If this kind of calm is what you've been searching for, then maybe it's time to stop performing peace and finally live it. The journey back to yourself starts with one simple admission. I'm not as calm as I pretend to be, and that's okay. Your wholeness is waiting for you, not in some future version of yourself that never gets upset, but in this moment with all your beautiful, messy humanity intact. Come home to yourself. The real you has been waiting long enough.